Lately, I've been trying to send you stories every day, but I feel like a large number of people who have signed up almost never come back to listen to the stories. I don't know where that is. Make you unhappy? I hope to receive comments and suggestions from you, and if you find the video good, please give me a like to give me more motivation. For those who have not yet subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button and press notification bell to wait for the next story. Now let's get into the story. Story 1. I work as a night janitor at the local high school. I would 95% of the time be the only one working the night shift. There was really a need for more than one. I always start with the downstairs classrooms and then work my way up to the upstairs. The cafeteria, gym, auditorium, and nurse's office. Those were all the responsibility of the morning and afternoon guys. So since I was always working alone, I would usually have radios set up in the hallways playing loud music like I did on this one night. The upstairs of the school was shaped like a U rather than an O, so to go around to the other side there was only one way. I was mopping the floor in one of the classrooms when I noticed from all the way across the other side of the school, the lights to one of the classrooms turned on. The light was left on. I always shut the lights off to any room I was in. I stood there with chills running through my body. I saw someone walking over to the window. They stopped and stared straight over at me through the window. It was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen. I didn't know what to do. Run away, confront them, call the police. I got closer to the window. The person looking at me looked to be in their 30s or 40s. He raised his hand and began waving at me slowly. I pulled the curtains to the classroom shut and then tried to catch my breath. When I pulled the curtains open slightly to look again, the light to the classroom across the school was off. My heart began to pound. I was sure he was on his way over to this classroom. At that moment, the option to run seemed best. And so I did. I ran into the hallway and down the stairs to the back door of the school. I didn't care about anything at that moment except my life. The security cameras in the school revealed that at some time in the middle of the night, the man emerged from the school basement and started wandering around. I got a closer look at the man's face and it was disturbing. He was not a normal-looking man. The scariest part was watching him go back down into the basement and then never coming out. He was never found. Story 2. I was the lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. Nearest town from the guard station was about 1.5 hours away. After moving into the guard station, solar power was not working and I hadn't slept for a month due to various factors. The woods there always had an eerie feeling to them, unlike the southwest ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the seasonal job, I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night. Now, this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I didn't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night, I always had an eerie feeling like I was being watched. One night, I was returning from my grocery run and I had a bad feeling. At the time, I did not have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin about 50 feet from my front door. All I could see were two eyes about 3.5 to 4 feet in the air. To say I freaked out was an understatement. I started yelling, "Get the hell out of here," but the eyes only crouched down and inched closer to me. I tossed a piece of firewood in the general area, and whoever or whatever it was leapt back a bit but did not make a sound. Tossed 4 or 5 more pieces, and whatever it was still inched forward. At this point, I fumbled with my keys. Of course, the solar power was out again. I managed to get inside and grabbed my shotgun. Technically, you are not supposed to have guns in government housing, but who lives in the hills have eyes backcountry and does not carry. I went outside, still could not get a good look with my headlamp, loaded the shotgun and continued to throw pieces of wood with one hand. Finally, whatever or whoever it was walked back into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPA and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, the trail crew came up and we found mountain lion tracks all over the porch, the rocking bench, and the compound leading back to the creek. After that event, I always heard the rocking chair move and someone walking on the porch, but never found any tracks after that. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird to not find any tracks. I've been stalked by mountain lions before and never had that eerie feeling like I did that night. Story 3. I used to work as a 911 operator in a relatively large metro area. One night, at around 3 a.m. or so, I answered a call from an elderly lady who said she didn't feel good. I tried to get more info about what was wrong: chest pain, trouble breathing, headache, is she diabetic, etc. She gave me her address and phone number and said no one else was home but the front door was unlocked so they could come in. I toned the call out as a general illness and kept trying to get more details. No matter what else I asked about what was wrong, all she would say is, "I just don't feel good. Can you send someone to help me?" After a few minutes she said, "I'm going to put the phone down for a minute. I need to go to the bathroom." I tried to get her to stay on the line with me, told her she can do whatever she needs to get ready, but I'd like to be able to stay in contact in case there's a problem. She said, "I'm going to put the phone down. I'll just be a minute." And that was it. I stayed on the line and asked for her every so often, but got no reply. A couple minutes passed and then the fire department called on scene, so I just disconnected and didn't think much about it. I told them that the caller left the front door unlocked and that she was in the bathroom. A couple more minutes and one of the firefighters called over the air with a weird tone and said, "How exactly was this caller received?" I told them the call was first party from the patient's home phone approximately 8 minutes ago. He didn't respond over the air but called the desk from his cell phone. On the phone he said, "Are you sure this wasn't a third-party call from a family member or something?" I said, "Negative. Caller advised I don't feel good and said no one else was in the house. So the best of my knowledge, the caller is the patient. Have you made contact?" He responded, "Yeah, she was in the bathroom like you said, but she's probably been dead for about 12 hours. Cold to the touch, fully livid, full rigor mortis. We're going to need a deputy out here." Afterwards we pulled the tapes of the radio and phone calls and checked the time stamps, the address, the phone number, and went over everything again a few times to see if I missed something. I called them back in the morning after the shift to see if they had any more information, but they were just as weirded out as we were. The phone was still in the living room and the patient was dead in the bathroom. Story 4. I'm currently a freshman in college. One of my close friends in my pledge class is on the soccer team and heard this story with too much evidence and corroboration for it to have been completely fabricated. My friend is close with this guy on the soccer team who recently went on a Tinder date with a junior at a college near us. She's from around Boston and commutes to her school. He matches with her on Tinder, takes her to dinner. They're having a good time and get to talking about their lives and such. On the date she tells him about another date she had recently been on that left her with a bad feeling. She had matched with a normal-looking guy on Tinder from the area and agreed to meet up after talking for a while. They went to a restaurant to get dinner, and they had planned to go to a pretty popular bar near there for drinks afterwards. She got a bad feeling by the end of the dinner, and the bar didn't end up happening. Apparently it wasn't anything too bad. She could just tell he was a bit strange and not her type. So she gives him an excuse and goes home. Their texts were normal afterwards, and she chalked it up to just a bad date. A couple days later, she meets up with the soccer guy from the beginning of the story, and they really hit it off. Her parents leave a few days after that for a trip which she had told soccer guy about. The date went really well, and he planned on going over at some point to chill with her. The first night that her parents are gone, she wakes up to a noise in the kitchen. Her room is on the second floor. The kitchen is on the ground floor, and there's a basement under that. Normal house in Back Bay. So she thinks she heard something, and it freaks her out badly enough that she calls her parents. They tell her, "Everything's fine. You're probably just hearing things because it's an old house. Don't worry." Realistically, I think that would have been anyone's, myself included, reaction. The second day they're gone, she's upstairs and hears a noise from the TV room behind the kitchen. They don't have any pets, and these were the types of noises that would make you get up from what you were doing to make sure something hadn't fallen or whatever. She described to my mutual friend as feeling like if she had gone downstairs at that moment, something bad would have happened. She calls her parents again, and they say the same thing. She gets up the nerve to go downstairs and look, and everything is normal. Nothing is moved, nothing is knocked over. The alarm records didn't show any doors or windows opening. She figures that she's freaking out over nothing. On the third day, everything is fine. No noises, no cause for concern. My mutual friend was going to go over there but had a unified midterm and couldn't make it. That evening she's watching TV in her room and hears a noise somewhere downstairs. This time it wasn't something she could ignore. All of her adrenaline was firing. She calls the cops without asking her parents. They say basically the same thing as her parents. "Since you just heard a noise, we'll try to have someone over to check outside your house in around an hour." About 10 minutes later, a police car pulls into her driveway. They rush the house, and she's watching this from an upstairs window. The cops throw the front door open and immediately fan out, sprinting through every room in the house and yelling clear. One of them tries the basement door, but it's locked from the inside. They break down the flimsy door and rush down into the basement. They found her Tinder date in the basement. He had completely covered one part of the room in some kind of heavy plastic tarp. He had a bag of heavy-duty butchering knives with him. The cops immediately surrendered him and took him away. She was told by the cops that after she called, they heard a second phone pick up, and when she hung up the phone, they heard him breathing and then laugh and then a click as he hung up the phone. The mutual friend heard about all of this after the fact, and the thing that really gets me is the part about the cops hearing him on the phone. When my friend told me and some of the guys in my fraternity that part of this story, it felt like all of the oxygen left the room. Story 5. When I was 16 in the mid-90s, I got in a fight with an acquaintance while a whole bunch of us were hanging out at his house. Stupid fight. I can't remember what it was about, but I decided screw it, I'm walking home. I lived about 5 miles away, but I didn't have a car, and since it was 2 a.m., there were no buses. I had to walk all the way home. In hindsight, my friends either didn't believe that I was really going to do it or were too startled by the sudden argument to realize what I was doing. I left the house and started walking. About a mile out, The suburban housing neighborhood melted into a main street with highway access. I started to notice a gray minivan was following me. It would follow me, pass me, turn a corner, and about 3 blocks later, it would do the same thing. It was very obvious that it was following me. I crossed over to the other side of the street, so I was walking the opposite of traffic flow, and thus no car could come up behind me. The van kept doing it on the other side of the street. About a mile later, there was a 24-hour grocery store with the lights on, but the parking lot was empty. I immediately crossed the parking lot and went to go inside. Just before I got to the doors, the minivan that had been following me pulled up into one of the parking spots. A guy called out from the driver's side and said, "I don't want you to walk over here. Just stay there and listen. I just wanted to let you know that I wasn't following you. I saw you walking a while back, but I also saw a guy following you and hiding behind the bushes. A couple of times you went to turn around or stopped. He got really close. When I saw it, I started to follow you both, just to make sure you were safe. Go inside the store and call someone to come pick you up, please. I haven't seen him since you crossed the street." He waited until I was inside the store and then pulled away. I didn't have anyone to call, so I let the night cashier know what was going on and hung out with her for about an hour, and then I was forced to leave. I've never forgotten this incident or that man, whoever he was. During the walk, I never saw anyone, but I have never been more terrified walking alone at night, and I feel very confident that he saved my life that night. Story 6. This happened to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home, taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m., she heard loud knocking on her back door. She went to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her and he was down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her inside since she had a newborn baby in the house and didn't want to interfere, so she told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister to not call the police and to just let her in. This is where my sister got suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later, and they told my sister that the same situation happened a few streets down. Apparently a man and a woman would do this in order to get inside people's houses. I'm sure this is very common, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew really creeps me out. What would have happened if she had opened the door for her? Story 7. When I was around 16 years old, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in that house as we were packing everything up. At some point I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read. Something I used to do when I was a young kid to get some peace and quiet. Now this is one of those deep closets that goes under the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour in, I shift a little to get comfortable and I hear a low, slow, warped voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped out, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke the door down getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left in my face, I went back to see what it was. It was an old stuffed bear from when I was about 3 or 4 years old that I happened to lean on just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again though, nothing. This poor bear that I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath to tell me that I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me piss myself. Story 8. I sleep in a one-bedroom apartment, and every night I close my door because I don't have windows in my room and I love the pitch-black darkness. So I drift off and snooze for however long and then start to stir. I casually wake up as my eyes adjust to the darkness. I check my phone and lay it back down to sleep more. As I'm laying there, I open my eyes and see a face. It's in the doorway of my now cracked open bedroom door. It's at the height of a child. It took me a minute to really gather what I was looking at. I could only make out the roundness of the little face and the black beady eyes. The lips were very shadowy but still visible. It just kept sort of swaying ever so slightly like it was trying to spy on me. And I just looked at it, and after a long time being fully exhausted, I fell asleep. I then woke up. It was morning. I gradually sat up, stretched, and then looked at my phone. Then I remembered the creepy face that I had just seen a few hours ago. I thought it was interesting that it must have been sleep paralysis, but that's never happened to me before. I then sat up and looked straight at my door, which was still cracked open. I never got up during the night, I remember that, and I always sleep with my door closed. I have told people this story and they just tell me, yeah right, or that's creepy. It was a weird situation. I can easily attribute the face to maybe still being sort of asleep but the door slightly being open. That's something that I can't put my finger on. Story 9. When I was a child, my family moved to a big old 2-story house with big empty rooms and creaking floorboards. Both of my parents worked, so I was often alone when I came home from school. One early evening when I came home, the house was dark. I called out, "Mom," and heard her say from upstairs, "Yes." I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in. We were decorating at the time and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms, but she was in one of the far ones, right down the hall. I felt uneasy, but I figured that was only natural, so I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing that her presence would calm my fears, as a mother's presence always does. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, I heard the front door downstairs open and my mom call out, "Sweetie, are you home?" I jumped back, startled, and ran down the stairs to her, but as I glanced back from the top of the stairs, the door to the room was now open slightly, and for a very brief moment I saw someone peeking out at me. When my mom and I went up to check, there was no one there. Story 10. This happened when I was in college, 4 years ago. I went to a university that was very close to the ocean on the East Coast. I made friends with some people one weekend, and one guy in the group of people I met invited us to go out on his boat with him sometime. He described his boat to a bunch of people and was very proud to have it. It sounded like an expensive sailboat by the way he described it. I'm not really familiar with boats and hadn't ever been on one other than a cruise ship when I was 11 years old. This guy said his parents bought it for him, and that made sense because he was known to be a spoiled rich kid. He was nice though, and the idea of cruising around some Saturday afternoon and drinking some beers sounded appealing. After that conversation, I saw him around in school but didn't talk to him much until one day he approached me in the library and asked if I still wanted to go sailing. I said sure. That sounded awesome, and he told me the following day he was going to go out onto the water and it would be a perfect opportunity. After a lengthy conversation about how sailing works and him assuring me that it was safe and that he had all of the proper training, I told him I would meet him at the docks the next morning. That night my roommate asked me what I was doing for the weekend, and I told him that I made plans to go sailing. He freaked out on me and told me that he really wished that he could go too. My roommate and I were really good friends, and honestly it sounded like way more fun if he was to join us. So I invited him to go, and that I was pretty sure that the other guy would be cool with it. The next morning my roommate and I grabbed some coffee and then went and grabbed some beers from the store to bring along with us on our voyage. We ate some breakfast and then headed over to the docks to meet the guy. We were pretty excited, and when we got there we followed the direction he gave me and found his boat. It was a huge orange and white sailboat. We stood on the dock next to the boat looking at it, and when the guy popped his head up from somewhere he immediately showed a look of concern on his face. He jumped off the side of the boat and onto the dock right next to us. He looked at my roommate and then at myself and asked, "Who is this?" I told him he was my roommate, that he was cool and that he had asked if he could come along. I told him I didn't think he would mind. The guy looked very annoyed, and it was very awkward for about a minute. The guy kept looking back and forth between us and the boat. He took his hat off and rubbed his head like he was really stressed out. Eventually he sighed and said that it was fine. A few hours later we were on the boat drinking and having fun. The water was pretty smooth sailing and the sun was shining bright. The guy acted a bit off the whole time, and I figured it was because I brought my roommate. After drinking 3 or 4 beers, I felt the courage to ask the guy what was wrong and if he was still pissed that I brought my roommate. He responded with something along the lines of, "It just kind of ruined my plans." My roommate chimed in and asked, "What plans?" I could tell my roommate thought it was funny because it sounded like the guy wanted to be alone with me. The guy looked at him and said, "Well, because you're here, I can't kill him." This took me off guard completely, and I felt fear and unbelievable relief hit me at the same time. My roommate and this guy started cracking up, and my roommate brushed it off as a joke. I didn't know what to think. Was this guy serious? Did I narrowly avoid being killed? Is his sense of humor just that weird? I believe I got my answer when I went below deck an hour later to grab another beer from the fridge. Next to the fridge was a brown swinging door that led to a small private bedroom. I was feeling the beer pretty good by this point, and without thinking, I pushed the door open to have a look. Laying at the foot of the bed, there was this big cinder block, some yellow rope, some tape, and what looked like a recorder of some sort. After seeing that, I felt sick to my stomach and wanted off this boat as soon as possible. I wanted to go back up and confront the guy, but I decided against it because I had no idea what he was capable of. What seemed like hours and hours more of being with this psycho, we finally made it back to the dock. We said our goodbyes, and on the way back to my room, I told my roommate about what I saw. He couldn't believe it. I'm pretty damn sure that my roommate saved my life that day. I shit you not. I never saw that guy again on campus. What he had planned, I don't want to know. Story 11. I'm 28 years old, and this is the first time I have thought about this incident in detail because of how traumatizing it was. I met my ex-girlfriend in California in 2010. We had both lived there our whole lives, but decided to move to Maine a couple years after we started dating. She had flown to Maine on a business trip in 2012 and fell in love with everything about it. The small towns, the scenery and the people. She came home and convinced me to pack up our whole lives and move there. And so we did. We saved up a bunch of money and rented a huge moving truck. The plan was for me to drive the moving truck across the country while she stayed behind 3 days to finish her classes at the local community college, which were due to end at that time. I would have just waited until her classes were finished, but we decided to take advantage of an incredibly good deal that we were offered from the company who provided the moving truck. She had a car that she had to drive there anyways while I towed my car behind the moving truck. My brother came with me on the trip, helping me drive. The drive was obviously a very long one, and when my brother and I arrived in Maine, about 4 days after we had left, we were exhausted. After unloading the truck and sleeping for about 16 hours, we decided to visit the small town of Belfast, which was about 14 miles away from my new house. We ate some seafood at a little family-owned joint, rented a scary movie, and made the drive back to the house. My new house was literally in the middle of nowhere. During the day, the view of the lake in my backyard was amazing. The woods surrounding my house were awesome and everything was really beautiful. At night, it was a different story. The house was incredibly creepy to be in. The whole house was surrounded with windows. You could not see anything looking out those windows at night, but I'm sure that if you were standing outside, you could quite easily see in. My brother had a flight booked back to California the following day, and we woke up very early in the morning to drive to Portland, where the airport was. I eventually made it back alone and wasn't able to make any phone calls or watch any cable TV because we had no service out there yet and no cable or internet hooked up. My cell phone did not work anywhere on that property. The only thing I had was a box of DVD. That was it. When I made it back, I decided to try out my new fishing pole that we had bought in town. I was out at the lake very long as it started to get dark in Maine very fast in the fall. I went back to the house and sat in the living room in the chair, looking out the windows at the scenery. My view was getting darker and darker. I turned on all the lights in the house and quickly became creeped out when it became pitch black outside. Imagine being in the middle of the forest in the middle of nowhere at night and looking around. You could not see your own hand if you held it right in front of your face. And when I say it was pitch black, I mean you can't see anything. We hadn't hung up any curtains or blinds yet, and I had the extremely uneasy feeling that somebody was outside the house watching me go from room to room. I decided to hang up sheets over all the windows using thumbtacks. I sat on the couch in the living room and put in a funny movie to try and shake the unnerving feeling that I had. It did not work. I eventually realized I had to try to get some sleep, and my eyelids were becoming sore. I was getting very tired. I covered myself with blankets on the couch and turned off the TV. After a few minutes my eyes had adjusted and I could see around the living room very slightly. My eyes were very heavy and I fell asleep. I woke up sometime later and it was still night and still very dark. I reached for my bottle of Coke that I had on the ground in front of me and took a big gulp. I set it back down and looked around the room. Now I'm having difficulty putting these next emotions into words that I could accurately convey. My heart began to throb when I noticed a man standing in the corner of the room. I couldn't see his eyes, but he had to have been looking at me. I did nothing and said nothing, and not by choice but because I couldn't. I was frozen. He didn't move and it was clear that he was trying to not be seen. After a few moments I did my best to think rationally and logically. I'm not sure that he knew that I had seen him. I had a blanket over me which might have shrouded my face, in which he wouldn't be able to see my eyes. After about a minute of gut-wrenching fear, I somehow decided to do something, and it was the hardest thing that I've ever done. I forced myself to cough. I did it while getting up in an effort to give him the impression that I didn't know that he was there. I slowly made it to my feet and walked across the icy cold wood flooring to the bathroom around the corner of the living room. He didn't move. I made it into the bathroom and nothing happened. I closed the bathroom door and slowly turned the lock to the upright position. Tears went down my face as I backed up into the bathtub behind me. I was staring at the door. I suddenly realized there was a small window up above the bathtub that I could most likely crawl through. I moved the shower curtain as silently as I could and reached up to the window lock. I unlocked it and tried sliding the window open to the left. The window began to squeak when I pulled it open, and I froze, hoping that the man didn't hear it. A couple seconds later, I heard a tapping on the bathroom door. It wasn't a knock but a tap, and it didn't sound like the tap of a finger. It sounded like metal, like he was tapping the knife against the door. At this point, I made the realization that the man either knew what I was doing or simply wanted me to know that he was outside the door. Adrenaline took over completely, and I slid the window open and pushed the screen out onto the ground. I tried not to exert any noise as I jumped up and began squeezing my body through the small window. My head and upper body were out, and I could not see inside the bathroom anymore. Only the dense, dark woods in front of me. I was pulling my legs through the window when I suddenly felt the man grab my foot. Directly after that, before I could even react, I felt my ankle be sliced open. I let out a noise of shock and surprise as I pulled out of his grasp and fell to the ground. I started heaving and felt as if my heart would explode. I stood up and looked around. I very quickly dashed out into the woods and fell to the ground, looking back at the house and the window to the bathroom. I felt my ankle, which was throbbing from pain, and brought my hand up to reveal it covered in slick blood. The deathly serious situation I was in became real and horrifying. I looked back at the house and suddenly saw the back door fly open. The man ran down the steps and started looking around into the darkness, searching for me. I became a statue on the ground and tried to control my breathing. He had a huge knife in his hand and was wearing all black. He was walking into the woods, but not near where I was laying. He was grunting, and soon after, I lost sight of him. I started frantically looking around, thinking that at any moment he would spot me and stab me to death. I saw nothing but trees and darkness. There was a bit of snow on the ground from a couple days before, and I was freezing and shaking at this point uncontrollably. About 10 minutes later, I saw the man walk out of the trees from where he entered and went back inside the house. I laid out there the rest of the night, and luckily, the sun started to rise only about an hour later. After the sun fully illuminated my surroundings, I felt as though the man had probably left, and I felt ready to move. I made it to my feet and walked around the house to the front. I saw that the front door was left wide open. I slowly approached it and looked inside. Nothing. I walked in a few steps and grabbed my car keys that were hanging on a hook by the front door. I ran back to my car and unlocked it, got inside and started the engine. I backed out of the long driveway and drove to the little general store a few miles from my house. And this is where the story ends. I got away, and so did the intruder. My ankle was pretty badly cut, but it healed after a few months with no problems. I suffered minor pneumonia from being outside for the time that I had, but nothing too serious became of it. This incident has made sleep very difficult for me, but writing this has oddly enough made me somewhat drowsy. I think maybe I'll try to go to sleep right now. Thanks for listening. Story 12. This incident happened back in 2014 when I was last committed to a psych ward for a suicide attempt. A little background. I am female and was 19 at the time. I was coming off of 3 years of bipolar medication while at a peak of substance abuse facilitated by my first year in college, going crazy with new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental episode and was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously I had only been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit you had to share a room with the same sex but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole was managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care other than to prescribe and get you out. I was led to the room I was staying in and the nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," and then left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s. Early 50s, Hispanic, and just a little taller than me. She would not keep her gaze off of the floor in front of her and didn't say a word or move when I said hi. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil but as a baby. I figured I would just leave her alone and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward with a nightly group, and my roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor, barely moving an inch. While everyone was lining up to be given their medication before bed, the ward across began to start banging on the glass of the door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against the glass window part while the guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. It seemed as they were almost going to break through, but orderlies came and took them away with their screams still lingering through the halls. Being in psych wards before, I wasn't surprised by out of the ordinary behavior like yelling or fights starting, but this was completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illness deteriorating their mind, not little angry kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I was all there in the head, but even these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try and get any rest that night. You know that feeling of being awake but you haven't opened your eyes yet. The moment where you are barely waking up and everything is still fuzzy. This is the state of conscious I was in later that night. I felt like I was waking up, but as if something was waking me up, yet still tired, so I wasn't opening my eyes. The more I came to, I felt pressure on my forehead and I could sense sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes to find the roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eye with one hand on my forehead and the other in a balled up fist on her chest while she speaks in what I assume is tongues. I look into her eyes and they are blank and empty of any emotion. She keeps speaking faster and getting louder. I am paralyzed at this moment, not sure what to do or what she would even do if I were to yell or move. There was only us in the room, and the nurse's station is all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead while still speaking fast and erratic, and I wasn't sure what she was doing or planned on doing next. She then put her hands on my forehead and at this point was screaming while shaking me, but not long before a nurse came in and took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated that she had to get up and do her job rather than concerning of how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and said, "Don't worry and just go back to sleep." I don't know how I managed to fall back asleep. I assume she got transferred to the more severe ward because I didn't see her again the next day, and luckily I was able to leave later that day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being, because while I have issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. I never want to go back to a ward in my life to experience this again, or something far worse. Story 13. First, let me explain as to why I was traveling alone in this story. One of my best friends, Kayla, and I work seasonally at a hiking lodge for the summer. We are both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto for the winter. We decided this year, as I bought a car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully, so wonderfully in fact that we ended up staying longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip short. Now my friend Kayla started her schooling November 1, and so I dropped her off at home in New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed the night at her place, planning to head back to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I could not come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia. So, knowing I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hostel for the next day, November 1, at the Acolyte Hostel on Cabot Trail. When I booked, only one option came up. I assumed, because I waited until the last minute to book, a private dorm with a queen-sized bed for $35. I thought what a bargain and booked immediately. I left Kayla's house in Moncton at 7 a.m. knowing it was a long drive. The Cabot Trail is roughly 150 km long, so I thought to be safe I'd plug the hostel address into my Google Maps and head straight there to get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel at roughly noon. Knowing it was too early to check in, I figured I'd consult with the front desk and figure out the nearby hiking trails and bring my bags in later. I was about to arrive at my hostel according to Google, but all around me was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me that my destination was on my left, but I saw nothing. About 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar bent to look like the letter spray painted bright red. I was staying at the Acolyte Hostel, so I guessed that must be the place, and I followed the dirt road. It led me to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn, no signage. There were 2 cars parked in front, so I parked alongside and got out of my car to try and figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man around mid-40s with dark hair and intense eyes popped out of the barn and asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes. He asked why I booked so last minute, and I explained to him my situation. Seemingly satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on the grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed was that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around its foundation, about 5 feet deep and 3 feet around. He led me across some particle board that was laid down as a sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about the property is that there were no windows. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin, the owner. He proceeded to tell me his grand plans for the space. It all seemed pretty far-fetched, as it was just an old barn with particle boards separating most of the rooms. He led me up the skeleton stairs made of plywood and 2x4s to the cabin loft, where I would be sleeping that night along with his family, the mother of his 5-year-old son, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted that I called her mom. The upstairs was certainly open concept. A frail curtain separated the beds to the sides, with a large open area in the middle. I asked if I was his only occupant that night. He said yes. I had a feeling he didn't often get occupants. I told him I was interested in the hikes in the area and wanted to go to them before it got dark. He gave me very detailed instructions of his favorite hikes and how to get to them, and off I went. I figured the place wasn't ideal, and I wished the website would have let me know it was still being built. But hey, I booked last minute, and beggars can't be choosers. Plus he was very friendly and helpful on my hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, but I figured I'd be heading into town for dinner. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season it was a ghost town. All the hostels and B&Bs in the area were boarded up. Such a ghost town, even the liquor store was closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark, dingy, empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase lightly, a disappointing supper. I had this romantic image in my head of me sitting there, on the harbor front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back some motion-fresh oysters. I was assured by the server that the fried oysters I had ordered were definitely not fresh. I figured with all of my options for things to do and see being exhausted, I should just head back up to the hostel and read my book. I got back around 8 p.m. I could smell that the family that lived there was in the midst of cooking dinner. A little boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys always do, "My name's JP. What's yours?" I say, "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He immediately asked if I wanted to come play. I said definitely. Just let me put my bags down in my room first. He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room. So instead of getting settled in, I just headed straight out into the main area. I started throwing a foam ball around with JP. His mother, father, Kevin, and grandmother, Mom, were all just sitting down to eat without even acknowledging we were there, playing right in front of them. The mother and father just start what seems to be a basic argument, which then turns into them yelling at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP I need to go to my room and call my mommy as she is wondering where I am. Of course, the boy who doesn't understand proper boundaries yet follows me through my curtains and sits on my bed. I try taking his attention away from his family fighting, so I start asking him where he goes to school, what his favorite color is. His mother starts calling for him. He doesn't answer, instead chooses to sit on my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yell to the mother that he's in my room. She runs in and snatches him off my lap and yells to the father, "I know what you're like when you get this angry. I'm taking JP. Don't follow us." I hear her book it down the stairs, and him run after her. I hear a car start up in the lot, and not just drive, but peel away out of the driveway. I hear him cursing, a door slams, and then the sound of the excavator I had seen outside earlier that day came on. I guess he wanted to do some handiwork to let off some steam. Now just left upstairs is me and Grandma, who still insisted that I called her mom. I walk out of my not-so-private curtained room with my bag and I say, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts, but I should go." She starts rubbing my arm and telling me to stay, explaining her daughter-in-law doesn't understand Kevin like she does, and she's the real problem. Now I'm ready to tell the mom to screw off and just leave, until I realize she still has a knife in her hand from cooking dinner. It's only a 4-inch paring knife, but with intent I'm sure it would do some damage. I don't think she meant it as a threat. I think maybe she was just a kooky old bird who didn't understand. Maybe don't hold the knife while trying to console a stranger. So I go along with what she is saying, while she rubs my mom with one hand and flails the knife around with the other. I inch closer and closer downstairs and towards the door. She keeps rubbing my mom and my shoulders with her free hand, telling me to stay and that her grandson is special, and before I even booked the night, he had a premonition that I would be staying with them. As soon as I get out to the door, I run towards my car. I start my engine and back up in the lot to get out of there. Kevin in the excavator blocks the path with about a 5-foot ditch on one side of the drive and forest behind me. He gets out and says he's sorry and tells me I should stay. He'll make it up to me. Grandma comes out with the knife still in her hand, saying that it's Kevin's fault that I'm leaving. They bicker for a full 5 minutes until I yell that if they don't let me leave, I'm calling the police. All of a sudden they get super defensive, like I'm the one being unreasonable. So I turn off my engine and start to dial. Kevin gets back in his excavator and starts backing up. As soon as he's far enough, I can see an opening to drive across the grass. I turn my engine back on and rip out of the drive. I'm sure doing a number on the suspension of my little sedan. As soon as the property is out of sight, I go to call my friend Kayla. No service. I remembered back to earlier in the afternoon when I first got to the hostel. I was going to check my messages and saw the no service sign. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to call the police. I drove the 6 hours straight to Moncton, New Brunswick, and stayed with Kayla. Story 14. A couple years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to take a job that he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had was that he did not want to fly his dogs out with him when they made the move, since they'd be staying in a hotel for the first month. He was also a bit hesitant to fly them out due to health concerns for both pets. By the time he located a home to rent, he was missing his pets and made the request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. We are Chicago folks, so the trip would be a long one. However, with the three of us to foot the nearly 30-hour drive, it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we'd foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we would let our friend's sister do some driving. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often past an 8-hour stay at a Denver Leakington Inn. As for the journey itself, it was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. From that point, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without much trouble until we entered California in need of gas. I had been driving for the majority of the first day and tagged my buddy in after being pulled over. I remained in the shotgun seat as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop, and found a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town, which had a mobile station. How wonderful. It was convenient, and it was located almost directly off of the interstate. We rolled in on a little bit more than fumes when we approached the pumps. Normally we would let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before, and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulled us up on the opposite side of the beat-up green sedan with a short, plump gentleman who just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoopties at the pumps, all unoccupied, and there were a couple of cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I swiped my credit card. The pump rejected my first swipe attempt, which I just chalked up to a misread. I swiped again, and the pump reads out, "Please see attendant." I was annoyed, but we needed gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing and asked if anybody needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboro Reds, I walked up to the store, and I make a mental note of how strange this gas station was. Kind of quiet, especially for one right off the interstate, but that's no matter. As I walked through the gas station, more weirdness. First thing I noticed is that there are some boxes of chips just left on the floor, like someone was restocking shelves, and then just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that immediately there was no one walking around in this place. With the 6 cars besides my own out there, I felt like I would see somebody. Things got even weirder when I realized that there was no one behind the counter. No customers or workers, and then it dawned on me. What had happened to the gentleman who was at the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. This is where I begin to feel the gnawing sensation in my stomach. Something isn't right. I have always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to get the hell out. I want to run, but I hold back. I would look suspicious booking it out of a gas station that was empty, so I decided to just play it cool. Natural. Don't let your body language lead on to how badly you're freaking out in the head. I was probably inside the gas station for only a couple of minutes when I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen for something. Anything. A flushing toilet would have been a good sound, but nothing. As I exit the shop and see my car, I begin to feel dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence, something comes and strikes them down. I am about 25 yards from the car when I see this gentleman come out from around the side of the shop opposite of me. This is not the same man as I saw while pumping gas. He was larger and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I could describe it was like Nick Cage's smile from the movie Face Off. I continued walking towards my car, but when I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me with a purpose. At this point, I hopped my way back to the car with an increased urgency in my step, and of course my friend has the door locked. There is also the 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently my travel companions did not notice how scared I was, or the creepy man still walking in my direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the door, to which he only halfway rolled down the window to tell me that the dog was in my seat, and they were afraid that she would jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back of the seat as hard as I could, while my friends are just now realizing how scared I am. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back, and see that the man had stopped about a pump away from where we were still, with that same look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After being thoroughly creeped out and pumping the gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It's been about 15 minutes since we pulled out initially, and we go silent as we notice that those very same cars are still sitting in the same spots where we had left them. After freaking out for a few minutes, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at a mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me, and was entirely creeped out by the situation as we were. In the end, we made it to LA and had a great vacation, but it still bothers me as to what the hell was going on at this little gas station off the highway, and what the hell was that smiling man's story. Story 15. Before we start, when this happened, I was an 11-year-old male in 5th grade. For some background, my bus stop is right across the street from my house. Also, a few streets away is a tennis club, which I am a member to. Okay, now to the story. I was getting ready for school, and walked out to my bus stop. No one else was there. They all probably got rides to school. My parents have let me go alone to this bus stop for about a year now, but after this, I don't want to anymore. I was standing outside, just looking around, and about 100 yards away, I saw something odd, but shook it off. I looked again, and staring at me, still 100 yards away, was a clown, head tilted and just plain creepy. I will also mention that he was standing in the direction of the tennis club. I ran back to my house, and when I mean ran, I mean I could have won a gold medal in the Olympics. I ran to my mom, panting and crying. When I reached the front porch, I could see that it ran towards the tennis club. Luckily, she walked out with me and stayed with me. I had tennis lessons after school, and believe me, I didn't want to go. I was afraid the clown would be at the tennis courts. Tennis was great, except walking out. I saw the same clown at the edge of the woods next to the outdoor tennis courts. I didn't tell my mom because I knew she wouldn't believe me. So fast forward 2 weeks. On the same day, my mom is taking a walk while I'm home alone. I see the clown walking up and down my street, but just the length of my house and side yard, like he was planning something. I just shook it off, even though I was honestly scared. About 40 seconds later, I hear a knock, but just one knock. Then I see the clown walk back out onto the road, and he walks up the hill, and then disappears. I called my mom about it, and in 5 minutes she was home. I was screaming and crying when she got home. I was very happy to see her, but still very scared. I told my principal, and even the school officer got involved, but they found nothing. Later that night, after the knock on the door, I told my dad, but of course he didn't believe me, but my mom convinced my dad to believe me. I have never stayed home alone since, and I am very scared too. I told my friends at the bus stop, and we even started a crime watch in the neighborhood. I still walk out without my parents, but only when my friends are at the bus stop. Story 16. Back in 2013, I had one particular friend that I used to hang out with every day during the summer. I went to her place often, and hung out with her and her roommate. It was a hot summer day, and I was walking to my friend's place. I remember I was feeling a bit angry for whatever reason. While walking, I noticed a silver car pass me by. I glanced to look, and saw an older man in his 60s checking me out. I was furious. I turned my head back around to focus on where I was walking, and thought nothing of it. I turned to the corner, and out of habit, I looked back. I saw the silver car's reverse lights. I remember thinking he was coming back to confront me, but I didn't care. I continued walking, and didn't have a care in the world. But because of my paranoia and habit, I looked behind me every so often, and saw that he was driving behind me very, very slowly, and occasionally parking to the side of the road to keep some distance, to not raise any suspicion. Again, I thought nothing of it, and actually chuckled. What is this old man thinking? Is he trying to scare me? I continued my walk and turned my cell phone camera on, activating the front camera. I tried to act dumb and pretend I had no idea that he was following me, but I had my eye on him. I walked away, while using my front camera to look behind me. He was still following me slowly, and parking to the side of the road sometimes. I was now close to my friend's house. I thought of leading him there, and then text or call my friend to come down with her 3 massive dogs. But then I thought, it might not be such a good idea to lead a possibly deranged man to my friend's house. So I thought of calling the cops, but I wasn't sure what street I was on, nor did I want to give this creep more time to finally decide to do whatever he had planned in his sick mind. Plus, the police take a while anyway. I casually looked behind me once again, pretending like I was just checking my surroundings, and that I had not noticed him following me. When I took another look at the car, there were now 2 men inside. The older man, and another male with messy long brown curly hair who looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I was now infuriated. I had many thoughts running through my mind. Should I call my friend and tell her to come down with her dogs? Should I call the cops? None of these appealed to me. I was too angry. I wanted to let them know that I was on to them. In a split-second decision, I took off the backpack I was carrying and took my hairspray out. I turned around and marched towards the car, as angry as ever. For some reason, I thought I could hurt them with my hairspray. However, when they saw my angry face speed walking towards their car while looking straight into their eyes, they were caught off guard. They actually had a shocked expression on their face. The car went into full speed reverse and drove into a side street. I had no time to take down their license plate. I went to my friend's house and called the police shortly after. After I was done explaining to my friend what happened, an officer came and asked me questions about the man and the make and year of his car. Unfortunately, I never noticed any of that. All I noticed was the color. The cop told me that they would patrol the area and let me know if anything ever came up. Unfortunately, nothing ever did. I never saw that piece of shit again, and at the time, I kind of wished I did, because I would have loved to beat his head into pulp, or at least just take down their license plate number. Story 17. This story happened to me surrounding my job. I haven't told this one to anybody in a while because it's been so long since it happened, but I remember it being one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I was 17, and I remember that it was fall because I had a hoodie on over my work uniform. I didn't have a car at the time, so once in a while when I couldn't cop a ride, I ended up having to walk a couple of miles to make it to work. This particular morning was one of those times. The walk was pretty normal, kind of nice, because that time of morning, people were already at work, so the streets were kind of empty. I remember thinking it was really nice out, with the temperature and the fall leaves, and I enjoyed the thought of not seeing many people on my walk. I had gone about a mile when I saw a man up ahead carrying the 6-pack and standing in the dead center of the sidewalk. I thought it was a little weird, but I was honestly more upset about having to acknowledge him in order to walk around him than I was about him being there. As I approached, he noticed me as well. He stared at me as I walked closer, not even pretending to look away. I started to get a little anxious, but I didn't really have the time to mess around, so I figured I'd ignore him if he tried talking to me. Once I was within an earshot of him, he smiled, and I braced myself. I remember thinking that I was too tired to be dealing with catcalling. As I walked around him, he started walking too, keeping pace with me. That's when I started to freak out a little. Wanting to put on a brave face, I refused to look at or acknowledge him. Looking forward, instead of keeping a neutral expression, since him stumbling along beside me didn't seem to faze me, he started talking. "Hey honey, where are you going?" His breath reeked, and I could tell he was probably drunk. Up close, I noticed he was dirty. His hair was greasy. His beard was scraggly, and he looked like he had been living out of a dumpster. I kept my eyes ahead of me. "I'm going to work," I mumbled, picking up the pace. He kept walking beside me. "Oh, do you work close by?" When I didn't answer, he continued, "Because I live near here. Do you want to come to my place and party with me?" I shook my head, and I could feel his eyes scanning over my body. His voice was a low whisper at this point, and I was starting to panic. "Yeah, you can come with me. We'll have fun. I'll even pay for you after we're done if that's what you want," he murmured. At this point, I was almost in tears, and I did the only thing that seemed logical. I booked it. Not a full sprint, but quick enough to catch him off guard and get myself somewhere safe. I found myself desperately wishing that there were people around. I looked over my shoulder to see the man running after me. Still a little unsteady on his feet, I was terrified. I'm not very quick, and I didn't know if him being drunk would be enough of a handicap. I had made it around a corner, and up ahead I saw a woman at a bus stop. I looked behind me again to see if he was still chasing me, and I looked just in time to see him wipe out on one of the uneven pieces of the sidewalk and crack his head on the corner of the curb, rolling out into the street along with his beer. He didn't get up, but I was too shaken and angry to really care. I slowed my pace, and once I got up to the woman at the bus stop, she smiled at me, saying something about how he had dropped his beer. I didn't reply to her, and walked the rest of the way back to work, looking over my shoulder now and then the rest of the way. To this day, I wonder what happened to that guy. Is he dead? Did he just wake up in the street and wander off to find somebody else to party with? Story 18. I am a 22-year-old female. At the time of this incident, I was about 16 or 17 years old. Because of what happened, I now never walk anywhere by myself after dark. I had decided to sneak out to meet up with a friend, but neither of us had a car, so we were going to walk and meet up halfway between our houses. The halfway point was about a 40-minute walk. We ended up meeting up at around midnight, and the walk there went fine, with no issues. We hung out for a while, and ended up losing track of time. It was now about 3 a.m. I had to get home before my parents woke up for work, and risked getting caught. We said our goodbyes, and I started on my long walk back home. Since it was 3 a.m., it was basically a ghost town, not a person in sight. I hadn't even seen a single car drive by, so I figured I would have a nice walk home. But I was wrong. About 10 minutes into my walk, I hear a car coming up behind me. Nothing too alarming about that. As the car passed me, they slammed on their brakes, then cut off all their lights. Immediate red flag. I saw the car turn down the next street ahead. I knew I would have to pass them to get home. Instead, I ran into a nearby parking lot, and hid in the bushes, and pulled out my phone to call my sister, to at the very least let someone know where I was, and what was happening, and called 911 if needed. I unlocked my phone, and of course, 1% battery life. And then my phone died. As soon as this happened, I started to panic. I waited there for what seemed like forever, and decided to start towards home again. I started walking again, and passed the street they turned on, and didn't see any cars. I started to relax, until I walked a little bit further, and saw the very same car parked in the Burger King parking lot. As soon as they saw me, They started back out of the parking lot and headed towards me. I bolted across to the other side of the street. Instead of staying on the same road, I ducked into a neighborhood that would let me go back onto the main road, but closer to my house. I got back onto the main road and thought I was in the clear, and then the creep was driving towards me, and as soon as he passed me, he made a U-turn, so that way he could follow me again, driving slow enough to be directly behind me. Luckily, another car was coming up behind him, so he was forced to speed up. I saw him up ahead, going to turn around again. I took this opportunity to lay down in the grass between someone's fence and the sidewalk, just out of sight, so any passing cars could not see me. After he passed again, I got up and started sprinting towards a neighborhood that would lead out to another main road that my house is off of. I made it to the main road and was so close to my house, but again, I see the car. He passed me and started turning around. I ran across the street and through this field and hopped on my neighbor's fence, cut across my court, and ran inside. I had never been so happy to be home. This guy followed me for my entire walk home. I'm not sure what would have happened if I had just kept walking and ignored all the warning signs, but I know his intentions were not good. He was by far the scariest thing to ever have happened to me. Thank you for listening, and I wish you good health. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.